It all started with a routine assignment, quiet, uneventful, and designed to blend in with suburban normalcy. My name's Derek, and I'm a freelance security contractor occasionally brought in by federal law enforcement for off-the-books surveillance jobs. Nothing glamorous, nothing dramatic, most of the time. Until I met Karen. I'd been deployed to West Pine Ridge, a gated HOA community about 40 minutes outside of Austin, Texas. Your average upper-middle-class suburb. White fences, fake smiles, and neighbors who thought their property lines came with a sheriff's badge. The HOA ran the place like a military operation, but worse, because it wasn't about safety or order, it was about control. My role? Park an inconspicuous Jeep on a driveway, mine legally, and monitor a nearby residence suspected of housing a digital currency laundering ring. The house across the street had drawn interest from the FBI, and they needed someone with the right clearance to camp out and observe. No interactions, no arrests, just watch, report. I chose a black 2015 Jeep Wrangler for the job, modified slightly with concealed tech, infrared dash cam, audio relays, and a remote uplink to a secure server. To make it blend in, I even added a couple of bumper stickers, "Keep Austin Weird" and "Proud Dad of a Lazy Dog." You'd never know it was a surveillance unit unless you were looking hard. The Jeep stayed parked in my assigned driveway, locked with a heavy-duty chain and padlock, just enough to deter tampering. I'd check on it daily and monitor the feed remotely from my rented basement suite. And that's when the HOA Karen decided to make it her mission to fix things. Karen enters the scene. Her name was Barbara Whitmore, but in the neighborhood she was simply Karen. Platinum blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard she wielded like a sword. She was the self-appointed president of the HOA, despite elections that somehow never happened. From day one, she didn't like the look of me. I wasn't the typical homeowner type. No flower beds, no porch decor, and I wasn't out waving to neighbors every morning with a mug that said, "Best Dad Ever." I kept to myself, and that drove her crazy. Karen's first complaint was about the Jeep. It didn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood, she said. I politely reminded her that I had legal occupancy and the vehicle was registered, completely above board. I even forwarded the lease agreement to the HOA office. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She said the lock on the Jeep made it look abandoned and that it was attracting attention. Irony, considering her clipboard crusades caused more commotion than anything in the cul-de-sac. When I calmly told her the Jeep was secure and none of her business, she pursed her lips and said something I should have taken more seriously. "Well, if you won't handle it, we will." The warning signs. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes. The Jeep's tires were chalked one morning. A violation notice appeared under the wiper, then a second, then a third. I ignored them, knowing full well I was within my rights and backed by a classified federal operation. I had documentation, even an agency liaison who told me not to worry. But Karen didn't care about rights or procedures. She cared about control. Neighbors started whispering. I caught one man snapping a photo of my plates. Another woman crossed the street to avoid me during my morning jog. It was clear Karen had started her campaign, turning my quiet post into enemy territory. Then the bolt cutters showed up. The day it all went down. On a Wednesday morning around 8 a.m., I was returning from a run when I heard the whine of a tow truck's winch in the distance. Rounding the corner toward my street, I saw it. Karen, flanked by a younger HOA assistant and a man with a reflective vest marked Property Enforcement. They were standing next to my Jeep as a tow truck backed into my driveway. I broke into a sprint. The assistant looked up as I approached. "You can't be here right now, sir," he said, blocking me with one arm. Karen pointed at me like I was a trespasser. "This vehicle has been marked for removal due to abandonment and aesthetic violations," she barked. "You were notified. You failed to comply. This is HOA jurisdiction." "Get away from my Jeep," I said flatly, heart racing, but not with fear. I knew what they were about to interfere with. The tow driver had already looped the front tires and was moving toward the driver's side door when Karen did the unthinkable. She pulled out a pair of oversized bolt cutters, bright red handles probably stolen from her husband's garage, and snipped through the padlock chain with one dramatic crunch. The lock clattered to the pavement. What she didn't know, the chain was laced with a silent alert system. Breaking it triggered an instant notification to the agency. It also activated a secondary alarm, an inaudible but distinct signal that the operation had been compromised. I didn't need to call anyone. They were already coming. I could feel the storm rolling in, even if no one else could. Karen was gloating, pointing at the cut lock like she'd just freed the town from some great evil. "That's how you deal with people who don't respect the rules," she said with a smugness that made my blood run cold. The tow driver glanced at me nervously. He hadn't signed up for a standoff. But Karen barked orders like she was commanding troops. "Keep going. This vehicle is being removed, per HOA authority." "You just made a huge mistake," I said, locking eyes with her. Karen scoffed. "No, you did. You think you're above community standards? Not in my neighborhood. This isn't some back alley car shop. This is West Pine Ridge." I didn't answer. I was too focused on the faint whir in the air, the telltale sound of a drone. High altitude, quiet rotor. It wasn't one of these Amazon packages. It was ours. Within 60 seconds, the unmarked black SUV turned the corner. Then a second one. They stopped in the middle of the cul-de-sac with military precision. Doors popped open, and 4 men in tactical gear stepped out, vests marked with DHS and DOJ insignias. Plainclothes, clean-cut, but radiating the kind of energy that made bystanders freeze in place. One of them tapped his earpiece and said something short and firm. The tow truck driver threw his gloves to the ground and backed away. Smart man. Karen, on the other hand, marched forward like she still had the upper hand. "Excuse me, this is private property. You can't just barge into a residential area unannounced." One of the agents, Agent Morales, stepped forward and flashed his badge so fast and so close she practically swallowed her protest. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you've interfered in an ongoing federal investigation. Step back immediately." Karen blinked. "A what?" Agent Morales turned to me. "Is this the compromised vehicle?" I nodded once. He looked back at Karen. "You just tampered with federal surveillance equipment. That's a federal offense, and you did it on camera." The drone overhead tilted slightly, capturing every angle. Karen turned ghost white. The takedown. The next few minutes happened so fast, even I had trouble processing it. 2 agents peeled off and approached the house across the street. The real target. They'd clearly already confirmed the op was blown. The Jeep had been feeding them weeks of encrypted intel, and thanks to Karen's bolt cutter antics, they had no choice but to execute a preemptive raid. I saw one agent disappear into the backyard while another moved to the front door with a small battering ram. It wasn't a full-blown SWAT raid, but it didn't need to be. Meanwhile, Agent Morales kept Karen pinned to the spot with nothing but his voice and badge. "You do realize," he said coolly, "that tampering with federal property, even unknowingly, is still a crime, especially when you've been warned not to." Karen was stammering now, her usual fire reduced to a flicker. I didn't know. No one told me. I thought it was abandoned." "You cut a lock, you ordered a tow, and you've been repeatedly notified by the legal tenant that everything was compliant. That's called willful interference." Her mouth opened, then closed again. And then came the second punch. Morales pulled out a slim phone and showed her a live feed, video of her earlier that week, telling another HOA member that she was going to get that ugly Jeep removed whether the law liked it or not. Karen had been under surveillance too. She just didn't know it. The public fallout. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. People emerged from their homes in robes and slippers, phones in hand, filming and whispering. The quiet cul-de-sac was now the center of a real-life drama that outpaced anything their HOA newsletters had ever published. Karen, once the queen of community order, was now center stage in a scandal of her own making. They didn't arrest her on the spot. Federal protocol doesn't always play out like TV. But she was issued a formal citation. She'd have to appear in court. And the HOA's legal team was suddenly very interested in separating themselves from her actions. As for the Jeep, it stayed right where it was. Agent Morales instructed the tow truck driver to leave the area, and a replacement lock was secured to the frame. The surveillance operation was officially compromised, but the data already collected had been enough to get warrants. Within hours, the residents of the house across the street were in cuffs, charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and a dozen other financial crimes. By that evening, the street was quiet again. But the silence was different this time. Karen's downfall begins. The next HOA meeting was a circus, normally held in a tiny community center room with maybe 12 attendees. This one was standing room only, and for the first time in West Pine Ridge history, it was streamed live to over 200 residents via the HOA portal. Karen sat at the head of the table, tight-lipped and visibly shaken. Someone from the audience shouted, "Are we going to talk about how our HOA president nearly got arrested by Homeland Security?" Another voice, "She broke federal law and almost ruined a major investigation." The board looked uncomfortable, glancing among themselves. Most of them had ridden Karen's coattails for years. But now that the ship was sinking, they were eyeing the lifeboats. When the floor opened to resident comments, the floodgates broke. Person after person stood up and aired grievances. About citations that didn't make sense, about selective enforcement, about bullying behavior. One man said Karen fined him for leaving his trash bins out for 30 minutes past pickup. Another woman said Karen refused to approve a disability access ramp because it didn't match the HOA's visual standards. By the time the vote of no confidence was called, Karen didn't even fight it. She stood up, gathered her clipboard, and walked out the back door, without saying a word. The federal investigation she unwittingly sabotaged had broader implications than anyone in the neighborhood realized. The house across the street, the one I'd been assigned to monitor, was part of a multi-state criminal network. While the arrest of the occupants was a win, the compromised surveillance had accelerated the timeline on multiple other operations. And guess who had to explain that chain of events to a room full of federal supervisors? Yeah, me. I spent the next 48 hours being debriefed, filling out reports, and helping the task force salvage what they could from the surveillance data. The Jeep's encrypted systems had held up. Nothing was lost. But that didn't change the fact that a civilian had gotten close enough to tamper with our gear. That kind of breach had consequences. They reassigned me after that. I was pulled from fieldwork for a cooling-off period. Understandable. But I'll admit, I was pissed. I hadn't done anything wrong. Karen had. But when you're part of operations that don't officially exist, there's no room for error. I packed up my basement rental and moved out that same weekend. But before I left, I did one last thing. I filed a formal complaint against the West Pine Ridge HOA, not just for their actions against me, but for their overall handling of property rights and resident harassment. I included copies of citations, audio logs, and witness statements. I made sure it got into the hands of the right regulators, because as much as I hated being caught in the mess, I hated bullies more. The neighborhood shifts. In the weeks that followed, West Pine Ridge went through a quiet transformation. Without Karen running the show, the HOA board scrambled to restore order. A temporary president was installed. Someone less inclined to power trips and more focused on actual maintenance and safety. Several homeowners who had previously stayed silent began coming forward with complaints. Old citations were reviewed. Fees were refunded. In some cases, official apologies were issued. The new board tried to rebrand the HOA image, but the damage had been done. And Karen? Well, she tried to spin the story at first, claimed she was just doing her job, that the government overreacted, and that she was being scapegoated for trying to protect property values. She even held a Facebook Live video where she cried about being humiliated and insisted she had no idea the Jeep was a government vehicle. Unfortunately for her, that video got picked up by a local news station, and when the anchor confirmed that she had in fact cut a lock off private property and issued unauthorized removal orders, public opinion shifted hard. The video got shared, mocked, parodied. It even made its way to a Reddit thread titled HOA Horror Stories, where thousands of people weighed in with similar experiences. Karen had gone viral, and not in a good way. The investigation expands behind the scenes. Something else was brewing. The task force didn't just write Karen off as a clueless neighbor. They looked deeper. They started digging into the HOA's operations, the finances, the way citations were issued, the way violations were resolved with heavy fines and liens on homes. What they found was disturbing. Turns out, Karen had been using her position to influence which properties got fined and which didn't. In some cases, she had personal disputes with residents and issued violations in retaliation. In others, she ignored blatant issues because the homeowner was a friend or political ally. There were even whispers of a kickback scheme with one of the landscaping vendors, falsified invoices, overcharges, and private payments. It wasn't enough for a criminal indictment, not yet, but it was enough to bring in the state auditor's office. West Pine Ridge was now under formal investigation, and the woman who once controlled the cul-de-sac like a mini dictator, she was getting a taste of what it meant to live under scrutiny. A personal twist. A few weeks after I relocated, I got a call from Agent Morales. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Karen's being sued." "Sued? By who?" He chuckled. By a group of homeowners in West Pine Ridge. Class action, harassment, property violations, misrepresentation of authority. That got my attention. They've even subpoenaed the surveillance footage, Morales added. Your Jeep footage. They're using it to show how far she was willing to go. I didn't say anything at first, just listened. Also, he continued, your complaint helped. State Oversight Committee is recommending a full audit of West Pine Ridge HOA. Might take months, but it's happening. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Good. It's about time someone stood up to people like her. You're a civilian again, he said. But if you ever want back in, we'll make room. Appreciate it, I said. But I'm enjoying the peace for now. Peace? He laughed. After what you went through. Exactly. I earned it. Karen's last stand. By late spring, Karen had disappeared from public life. Her house went up for sale. Rumors swirled that she moved in with a sister out of state to start fresh. Some said she was staying with family. Others claimed she was living in a condo with no HOA, hiding from the internet and nursing her grudge. But the damage she caused stuck around. Even long after she was gone, her name was brought up at community meetings as a cautionary tale. Her fall from grace became a warning about unchecked power, about the abuse of community authority, and about how quickly control can be lost when someone oversteps. The bolt cutters, the clipboard, the smug attitude, it all became neighborhood lore. And every time someone in West Pine Ridge started acting a little too high and mighty, someone would whisper, "Careful, you're starting to sound like Karen." Karen's civil case gained momentum like a runaway train. At first, it was just a handful of homeowners filing claims, seeking damages for harassment, unjust citations, and the intentional manipulation of HOA power. But within weeks, nearly a quarter of the neighborhood had joined. Their grievances were eerily similar. Violations issued without due process, suspicious timing of citations after disagreements, absurd fees for cosmetic infractions. The discovery phase revealed even more dirt. Emails between Karen and the HOA's former treasurer showed casual conversations about targeting residents. One thread even joked about making that guy with the bright yellow mailbox pay double just for being ugly. It was petty, vindictive stuff, but it painted a very clear picture of an organization that had long since stopped serving the community and started serving itself. Lawyers had a field day with it, especially when the footage from the surveillance drone was introduced. Karen cutting the lock, ordering the tow, and ignoring multiple warnings from me. That became the centerpiece of the case. It wasn't just that she made a mistake, it was that she doubled down when she had every chance to back off. The local media picks it up. Naturally, the press couldn't stay away. First, it was the local paper, running an op-ed titled, "When Neighborhood Watch Becomes Neighborhood Tyranny." Then it was the evening news, featuring a 5-minute segment with interviews from affected homeowners. The reporter's tone was scathing. Karen H. once ruled the HOA board of West Pine Ridge with an iron fist and a bolt cutter. But her downfall, sparked by the illegal towing of a government surveillance vehicle, has since snowballed into one of the most talked about HOA lawsuits in the state. Karen tried to control the damage, hired a PR consultant, released a statement claiming she acted out of concern for the safety and cleanliness of the neighborhood. But it was too little, too late. Every comment she made was met with a wave of mockery online. Her name trended on Reddit's Are Entitled People for 3 days straight. Someone even made a TikTok using her HOA quotes set to dramatic courtroom music. It went viral. Meanwhile, in the background, I'd been laying low, living quietly in a nearby city. Off the radar. But one afternoon, Morales called me again. This time with a different tone. "You sitting down?" he asked. "Should I be?" We found something else. A shell company, connected to the former HOA treasurer and another board member. And guess whose name shows up on a couple of contracts? Karen's. He paused. They were funneling neighborhood dues into private accounts, inflating invoices for lawn maintenance, trash pickup, even snow removal. It wasn't just pettiness anymore. It was theft. That stopped me cold. "They're going to jail?" I asked. He let out a breath. "We're building the case. It's strong. But white-collar crime takes time." Still, it was vindication. Karen hadn't just overstepped. She'd corrupted the system from the inside. The federal fallout. The Department of Justice formally closed the surveillance case tied to the house across the street, but not without internal reviews. I wasn't blamed for the breach, but it did force changes in how civilian-adjacent surveillance was handled. Policy shifts, new training protocols. A quiet warning that even in low-profile neighborhoods, operational exposure is never zero. One agent told me, "Next time, we park a decoy car and monitor from 3 houses over. That way, the Karens of the world don't become national security threats." I laughed, but he wasn't really joking. A twist I didn't see. Coming one evening, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name printed in neat block letters. Inside was a single-page note. "You don't know what kind of trouble you brought to this neighborhood. That woman may have been a tyrant, but at least she kept things in order. You've made a lot of enemies." No signature, no threats, just vague bitterness. I turned it over to Morales, who ran the envelope for prints. Nothing came up. Probably just some HOA loyalist who still thought Karen was the hero of the story. But it reminded me, not everyone was glad the system had been exposed. Some people preferred the illusion of order, even if it came at the expense of fairness. It didn't scare me, but it didn't sit well either. A new HOA era. Months passed. The lawsuits dragged on. Karen's former allies were deposed. 2 former board members were arrested for fraud. A judge ordered a complete re-election of the HOA board under third-party supervision. It was the first time in the history of West Pine Ridge that every seat on the board was replaced in a single vote. The new leadership wasn't perfect, but they were transparent. Open meetings, recorded minutes, no more petty fines over mailbox colors or flower pot placements. Residents who had once cowered before Karen's authority now spoke freely. And the Jeep? It was retired from fieldwork, reassigned to training duty. A war relic in a quiet domestic war. The unexpected phone call. Nearly a year after it all went down, I received one final surprise. "Hello," said the voice on the other end. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Tim Kruger. I was the tow truck operator the day Karen had your Jeep taken." I blinked. "Oh yeah, you bailed pretty fast." He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, well, I saw that SUV and the gear those guys had, and I figured I wanted to keep my commercial license." "What's up?" "I just wanted to say, thanks for not naming me in your complaint. I got approached later by the DOJ to testify, and I told them everything. But if you'd come after me, I could have lost everything." "You were just doing your job," I said. "Karen gave the order." "I've seen some crazy stuff in HOA neighborhoods," he replied, "but that was something else." I hung up, thinking about how many people had just gone along with Karen's orders for years. Not because they believed in her, but because she made it dangerous not to. It wasn't just about law, it was about power and fear. A year after Karen's infamous Jeep stunt, the neighborhood was almost unrecognizable, calmer, cleaner, quieter in a good way. New leadership had restored basic civility, and homeowners were finally speaking to each other like neighbors instead of war-weary soldiers under a dictatorship. Yet the shadow Karen left behind still lingered, especially in courtrooms. Her civil case had ballooned into a multi-claim class action, now being watched by legal scholars and real estate watchdogs. HOA abuse had always been talked about online, but now it was being dissected in law schools and evening specials. Karen had unintentionally become the poster child for what could happen when untrained civilians wield unchecked power over other people's property. She, of course, denied everything, but no one was buying it. Not when the evidence included financial irregularities, manipulated fine records, and footage of her ordering a tow truck to remove a locked government vehicle she had no right to touch. Worse for her, her legal team was growing visibly frustrated. Motions to dismiss were rejected. Every attempt to claim qualified immunity as an HOA official was laughed out of court. Judges were not in the mood, especially the one who bluntly stated during a hearing, "Mrs. H, this isn't about you upholding neighborhood beauty standards. It's about you operating outside the bounds of law and due process, and that's exactly what we're here to address." Collateral damage. But while Karen was becoming a public example, I couldn't help but reflect on the quieter victims. There was Mr. Weathers, the elderly veteran who had been fined hundreds for unauthorized flag placement. Karen had cited him for flying a U.S. flag from a pole she didn't like. She claimed it violated height restrictions. He lost that battle before it began and had paid the fines just to avoid further hassle. Or the single mother down the street who was slapped with a $500 fine for excessive children's toys left on her front lawn. Her 3-year-old had left a plastic fire truck out one afternoon. Karen photographed it and labeled it visual clutter. Neither of them had the time, energy, or resources to fight back. Until now, with the lawsuit underway, they got to tell their side. They stood in court and read their stories into the record. I watched from the gallery as tears welled up in Mr. Weathers' eyes. He didn't care about the money. He just wanted to be respected. The jury listened. The media listened. And finally, Karen had no choice but to listen too. Karen's deposition. The breaking point. If there was one moment where everything changed, it was during Karen's sworn deposition. Her attorneys had tried to prep her. Keep it simple. Stick to the script. But she couldn't help herself. She rambled. She deflected. She played the victim. When asked about the Jeep incident, she doubled down, saying, "It looks suspicious. I didn't know it was government property. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I would do it again." The court reporter paused, almost incredulously. "You would do it again?" The plaintiff's lawyer repeated. "If something looks suspicious, it's my duty as HOA president to investigate and take action." "But your position doesn't give you the authority to enter private property, remove private vehicles, or override legal boundaries." Karen blinked. "I had to act. No one else would." That quote made headlines. And by the next morning, the HOA's insurance provider, who had been reluctantly footing her legal bill, formally withdrew support. She was now personally liable for damages. The settlement talks begin by mid-year with mounting legal fees, withdrawn financial backing, and no goodwill left to mine. Karen's team started pushing for a settlement. They offered a five-figure payout to the plaintiffs, an admission-free agreement meant to make it all go away. It didn't go over well. "We're not here for hush money," one resident told the judge. "We want reform. We want safeguards. We want to make sure no one like her ever controls a neighborhood like ours again." Eventually, a deal was struck. Not just financial compensation, but structural changes in HOA policy. All board members would be required to complete training on property law and resident rights. Fines could not be issued without written notice, proof, and the opportunity for appeal. Any enforcement requiring entry onto private property had to be reviewed by the full board and subject to legal oversight. And most importantly, no board member could serve more than 2 consecutive terms. Karen had created a dictatorship, but from its ashes, they built something fairer. What happened to Karen? She sold her home at a loss, quietly, discreetly, moved out overnight. Some said she moved to another gated community 3 states over. Others claimed she changed her name, tried to start fresh. But the internet never forgets. Every time her name was Googled, the bolt cutter story popped up. The Jeep, the task force, the lawsuits. It followed her like a permanent stain, and she hated it. Someone emailed me a screenshot once, a rant she posted anonymously in a private Facebook group for HOA board members. "It's not fair. I gave my life to that neighborhood. I kept it clean, safe, beautiful, and they turned on me. All because of one stupid car." Stupid car? That Jeep had exposed more than just her power trip. It had pulled back the curtain on everything wrong with the way she'd ruled. It wasn't about beautification. It was about control. Moving on. As for me, I stayed out of the spotlight, eventually returned to government work, but in a new department, one focused more on infrastructure security than undercover surveillance. I kept in touch with Morales, who said the story became part of the official training slides, a case study in how unpredictable civilian interference could be in covert operations. "Next time," he told me, "we park it in a garage and slap a fake HOA sticker on it." We both laughed, because at the end of the day, we had to. This wasn't just about a rogue Jeep or a power-drunk HOA president. It was about something bigger: how quickly systems can be abused, and how fragile trust really is when neighbors start acting like enforcers. Months turned into seasons, and eventually, the echoes of Karen's rule became little more than a strange memory. The neighborhood had changed, not just in policy or leadership, but in spirit. There was something lighter in the air, like people could finally breathe without fear of fines or surveillance disguised as community watch. Front porches were livelier. Kids played in front yards without parents constantly peeking through blinds. People waved again. A kind of healing had taken root. But for me, it was also a time for personal reckoning. What started as a simple surveillance setup had spun into a civil war. The government had been watching criminals, but it was a civilian that triggered the chaos. I realized something that I hadn't been able to admit before. It hadn't just been Karen who failed. We failed too. We underestimated how intrusive an HOA could be. We failed to account for just how aggressively someone like her could act in the name of order. No file in our database said, "Beware of HOA president with bolt cutters." But maybe it should have. Back at the office, The Jeep, now nicknamed Karen Catcher, had become something of a legend around the office. New hires would hear the story and laugh in disbelief, asking, "Wait, you let an HOA tow a federal vehicle?" I'd smirk and say, "We didn't let her. She took it." Big difference. There was even talk of hanging the original broken lock in a display case, like a war trophy. But beneath the humor, there was a seriousness too. The FBI and DHS updated their internal risk reports to include HOA activity under civilian interference. It was minor, sure, but it was there now. I'd like to think I helped push that change. Unexpected closure. One cloudy afternoon, about a year and a half after the Jeep incident, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Again. This time it wasn't a threat. Inside was a small key, a cheap house key with a typed note. "You broke the system that broke me. Thank you." That was it. No name, no explanation. But I knew who it was from. The young mother who'd been fined for her kids' toys. She'd moved away shortly after the lawsuit concluded, said she needed a fresh start where her family wouldn't be watched like criminals. I figured the key symbolized something bigger. Trust, closure, maybe even a weird way of saying she'd found peace. I never tried to contact her. Some stories are better left with a quiet end. The last neighborhood meeting. Oddly enough, I did return to the neighborhood one last time. I was invited, informally, by the new board president, a former firefighter named Daryl. He'd been one of the first people Karen fined for having improper hose storage. Now he was running the show with transparency and calm confidence. "We're holding a vote to dedicate the community bench," he said. "Thought maybe you'd like to see how things are going." I went. The bench was installed near the main walking trail under a tall oak tree. A small bronze plaque read, "In memory of community spirit and in honor of all who fought to preserve it." It was simple. No names, no politics, no bitterness. But it said everything. Karen's last stand. I never saw her again. Not in court, not on the news, not even in passing. Rumors floated around that she tried starting a YouTube channel about neighborhood decorum, but had to shut it down after people recognized her. Another claimed she applied to be on the board of a Florida HOA and was rejected once they Googled her name. Maybe she found peace. Maybe she didn't. But she was no longer anyone's problem. The Karen empire had crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. Justice wasn't just served, it was archived, documented, and laminated in training materials across 3 federal departments. Epilogue. Lessons learned. People ask me sometimes, what would you have done differently? It's easy to say park the Jeep somewhere else, or warn the HOA ahead of time. But the real answer is nothing. Because the chaos Karen unleashed didn't create the problem, it exposed it. Neighborhoods aren't just made of lawns and fences and painted curbs. They're made of people. People who deserve dignity, fairness, and a voice. Karen forgot that. She thought rules made her a leader. She thought control made her respected. But leadership without trust is just tyranny with better landscaping. And sometimes it takes a bolt cutter, a stolen Jeep, and a federal task force to remind everyone what really matters.